Hi, and welcome to Live Happily Ever Awesome. We are here with Julie Rappaport, PACT-Certified Couples Counselor. And today we are on episode 972. And the topic is resentment. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We took a week off last week. We were just overwhelmed with things. You had a really fun weekend qualifying for the CrossFit Games. Congratulations to you on that.
Thank you.
Super exciting. What does that look like? What does that look like for you training for the CrossFit Games and work? How do you juggle all that?
I mean, it's really no different. I don't know whether, you got to increase your volume a bit just so you can participate with 3 days worth of competing. But
You've been to the games before, correct?
I've qualified 4 times, but only competed once.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a story in itself. But
right. You need to stay healthy, right?
I do, and there needs to not be a pandemic, and yada yada.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you just keep doing what I'm doing, and maybe increase a little bit so you get up maybe a little bit earlier, or try to fit in an extra session in the afternoon or something. But it's I don't believe that necessarily more is better.
So not for us.
Yeah.
For our age people, right?
Yeah. I think recovery is the best, kind of should be first. And then from there, maybe incorporating a little bit more volume and, but finding that balance between more volume, but more recovery as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're at elevation, right? You're in Boulder. Do you find that that's an advantage to you in certain ways when you get to Madison or other places that you compete?
Yes and no. I mean, I wish it was like super significant. I wish it felt like, oh my God, I could run for days. It does help on the longer, kind of more aerobic stuff.
Okay.
But you're there enough ahead of time that you begin to acclimate to the sea level. And so, I mean, I'm sure there's some little advantage, but
yeah. I was hiking in Asheville, North Carolina this weekend, and we were at like an elevation of like 4,000 maybe, or 3,500. And I thought, oh, I'm at elevation because I live probably like under sea level where I am.
Yeah.
So I'm not accustomed to that. And going to be heading out to Wyoming in the end of June. And I hear that's pretty high up too. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it makes a difference. I mean, I went up to Steamboat and was training up there over spring break, and, was just like, God, I'm winded. And then I realized like, oh, they're higher than we are. So, but it does make a difference. People come out to, visit and train in our gym, and, it's like, oh, it's going to take you about 2 weeks to adjust.
Acclimate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, this isn't a CrossFit podcast. This is a relationship podcast, but I couldn't let any more time go without congratulating you on that. And we're going to be excited to see you in Madison. It's going to be fun.
Thanks.
So, couples and resentment. I guess there's lots of different reasons why a partner could resent their partner. Should we think about a couple and sort of work through them? Or I
mean, so resentment typically is, of course it comes from past hurts and trespasses. And resentment is typically an indicator of codependence. And what, we throw that word around a lot, and a lot of people are like, they don't really know what it means. So kind of to dumb it down would be, in codependence, there's, you think of a what's called the victim triangle.
Okay.
And one of the points is a perpetrator. One of them is the victim, and one of them is the rescuer. So that is always present in a codependent relationship. So with resentment, typically the person who is resentful is taking a more victim stance, and their partner is the perpetrator in their mind. And then, there's some sort of thing in the mix that's a rescuer, whether it's alcohol, drugs, TV, pets,
Okay, so
kids.
it's a third party. It's not like the perpetrator becomes the rescuer or anything like that.
It can be that too,
Okay.
because we shift around on the triangle all the time.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, you could be super resentful, so then you lash out, and then, so then you're the perpetrator and your
Okay.
partner's the victim, and, perhaps you guys have alcohol in the house and that rescues it all. And, so it's just, there's so many different iterations of it. But I would say that resentment can't really exist for a prolonged period of time unless there's some codependence going on.
Okay.
And the way out of codependence would be to instill boundaries, and stick to them. Right. So it's, if you think of these times when you might have, I think maybe we all have had times where we've been resentful, but if you really take a look and think like, oh, was a boundary trespassed? Was that boundary talked about? Was it clear, or was it just expected? And and if it was clear, did you then hold the person to it? And if not, why not? And, so oftentimes there could be agreements or, boundaries such that, and then somebody doesn't adhere to that. Hold on. Oh, sorry. My puppy was biting my toe.
I was like, what is happening right now?
Oh my God.
Duncan.
Yeah, that was
Not
significant.
fun.
But, sometimes then, what could happen is that somebody breaks the agreement, but instead of the one that held to the agreement that got upset that the other one broke the agreement, actually speak up and say, hey, remember we had this agreement and this doesn't work for me. Oftentimes they'll just kind of swallow it and be like, well, great. They just broke the agreement, and
Yeah.
not, and then that harbors the resentment. Right.
So can we put this in practical terms then? Can we think of an example of like a boundary that was broken or
Sure.
something and sort of talk through it?
Sure.
I don't necessarily need to come up with it, but
I can come up with one.
okay, you can come up with one then.
So, say you and your partner, you really, really like a clean kitchen.
Okay.
You don't like dishes in the sink. And your partner comes from a place of like, I'll get to them when I get to them. No big deal. Like, if they sit for a couple of days, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
And you, of course, have run into problems with that. And so then you guys decide you agree, and you're like, okay, how can we find some middle ground here? And so the person who likes it clean says, okay, you don't have to do them right away, but what I would ask is that when I wake up in the morning, that the dishes are done whenever you want to do them. Just that if you put your dishes in the sink, they either need to be washed or put in the dishwasher before I wake up in the morning.
Okay.
And so the other person's like, okay, that's fair, right? I don't have to do them right away. So they agree upon that. And then time after time after time, the person wakes up and finds dishes in the sink, or, dishes in the sink. And instead of, saying, hey, remember we had this agreement, I'm confused of what's going on, they might just be like, oh, God, and start to either do the dishes, put the dishes in the dishwasher, or not do that because they don't want to be their mom, quote
Mhm.
unquote, and then sit there and it's almost then becomes this test of like, how long is it going to take for them to notice this and do it? And, all the while the resentment builds. And
Yeah.
had they just said, hey, what's going on, and hold the other person accountable to the agreement, and have to, if they needed to renegotiate or whatever. But if the person, and then of course, if the person continues to not abide by the boundary or the agreement, well, then there's a bigger issue.
Mhm.
But if you continue to not bring it up, you're going to build that resentment.
Interesting. I was hoping for a more salacious topic, example than dishes, but we'll go with that. That's fine.
There's plenty.
Right. Okay, so that's interesting. So, it's really important then, if you've come to some kind of negotiation about what no matter what it might be, a boundary or something else, that if you feel like it's being not executed upon the way it was agreed to, then you have to bring it up and talk about it to sort of either renegotiate or just, like, right the right the ship a little bit to say, like, "Hey, we talked about this. You said you would do this. You're not doing that." And then, like, "Okay, babe, I'll start doing that
Right.
again." Okay. Seems
Yeah.
simple enough. So then with resentment, you're keeping quiet and you're not saying anything. It keeps happening. And then it feels like it just bubbles over into, like, everything. You're gonna,
Everything.
be grumpy, you're gonna withhold things, you're gonna, not it's gonna bleed into other boundaries that maybe you are gonna, retaliate and, you know yeah.
It becomes very passive aggressive.
Mhm.
A lot. And also outwardly aggressive, like just short fuses, um and it really kind of can take on a life of its own, and just continue to build and build and build and build and build. And this goes into other topics where a lot of times, the kitchen, the junk drawer, the
Mm.
sex, a lot of times, sex could be withheld, due to all the resentment that's built up. It could be that the issue is in the bedroom and resentment has built there, but it could be about dishes, and there's so much resentment, and but of course it's not about dishes. um, but it gets played out in these other areas as well. So it really is just kind of this, it oozes into all aspects of your relationship. And what resentment, if you're trying to work on your relationship and move forward, um, resentment is a tough one to work with, because the person who is so resentful is kind of stuck in the past and it's holding on to that. Because victim, um, although victim doesn't sound fun, victim has a lot of power. Victim has a lot of power.
Yeah.
Um, so, there's this almost this tug of war of, like, staying in that power, and wanting to hold on to their resentment. Because if they let it go, I think there's a fear that, they fear that it's going to happen again. So if they let it go and put themselves out there and be vulnerable, it's just going to happen again.
Does this bleed into sort of we talked about betrayal before too, like, can breaking a boundary and betrayal are kind of one and the same, right? Because you assume most people's have, like, I don't know, cheating, for instance, like, cheating is a boundary, I'm not gonna do that, whatever. But we talked about that victim mentality, or not the victim mentality, but, like, who has the power, who has the control, and, like, the person that was betrayed sort of shifts into the one that's being in control. Is that sort of like a victim mentality? Because I know with that, sometimes that's an uncomfortable position for the victim to be in. Sorry, I'm going
So,
really deep now.
you're talking about betrayal and the one who was betrayed.
Yeah,
So yeah, then they get
I
to,
'cause I would assume they would hold some resentment
yes,
towards the person, towards the betrayer.
right.
it seems related to me.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, it is related, and yes, they would then have to have all the power, and but it is not when when we work this way in therapy. It's not a codependent relationship with when they are in the power position.
Okay.
It is not that they just, I mean, that would just be putting the shoe on the other foot, where then the other person would gain resentment if it was codependent, right?
Okay.
We want to just right the wrong, but that, kind of piggybacking on what you're saying is, when you have agreements in a relationship, boundaries that have been agreed upon, and somebody continues to break them, that is betrayal.
Mhm.
However, I think it's almost, it's more difficult, I think, for partners to really kind of take a stand with when it's like that, because it's not really overt, right? It's not like um an affair.
Mhm.
It, like, that's pretty obvious, right? It's not like hiding finances. It's like these little kind of betrayals that happen
Mhm.
consistently and persistently. And, it takes two to tango. Somebody has to allow the persistent and consistent betrayals, but it is a betrayal type of situation. Um, it's handled a little bit differently, but it is, there is that dynamic. But what I want to go back to this person who was, harbors the resentment,
Mhm.
if there's only one. And this could apply to if both partners harbor resentment, but it's like one of those things where in therapy we have to address the resentment because it's there, right? It's present, and we want to learn from the past so as not to create the same mistakes in the future. But so we have to kind of touch upon that, such to build a better future. But if we dwell there, then we're just creating more problems in the present,
Mhm.
and we don't want that. So it's a delicate balance, and it takes I think a skilled therapist to, kind of go in and out of how, using it as a springboard to better the relationship in the present and future, versus, dwelling there, digging up the past, really, getting in the muck.
Mhm.
That's not going to do any good. It's actually going to create more problems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's hard a lot of times, resentment, why the title is the ultimate relationship killer, is it really just destroys relationships. It is so, it is, it just, it becomes this wall of ick.
Muck, yeah.
Yeah, that is very, very hard to break down, once it's been there for a while. And
Mhm.
a lot of times couples will come in with resentment, and just they will be in this state of, I really just don't know. I don't know whether I want to continue.
Mm.
And they really, and on it, there are tools that I can use to try to get to that, but it's not a simple, like, a lot of times I can, with just simple ambivalence, I can get to the real answer pretty quickly.
Mhm.
But when there's resentment present, it's, there's almost this, this tends to be this protection layer that's pretty thick, that, they can't really even feel, what is true and what isn't. And so it takes a while.
Wow. Do you find with couples that, that one typically is harboring resentment more than the other? I mean, when you get couples that come in, is it oftentimes, like, lots of things happening and, like, one partner's resenting their partner for X, Y, and Z, and yet the other partner is also resenting, you know what I mean? It's not
Yes.
like one-sided
I mean, it could be
victim.
both. It could be one.
Mhm,
I would say typically, um, it's not don't quote me on this, but I would say probably in my experience that it tends to be waves that harbor more resentment than islands. And the reason is that islands don't like to really be in the past. They just are kind of more present and future. Like that happened, let's let it go and move forward. And
mhm,
waves tend to live either in the past or the future. And so they're anxious about the future, or they're harboring resentment from the past, and so they kind of have a hard time being in the present. So they tend to um, at least be more vocal about their resentment, and it oozes out of them. I mean, they can't hide it at all. Whereas an island might be able to hide it better.
mhm.
Islands are better at hiding in general, but
Yeah, go figure.
yeah, yeah. Um, but they
That's what
had to
they
be that way.
right, right.
Yeah. Um, so it's never a good thing if you're resentful. You should uh, chat, talk, communicate.
Yeah. We haven't talked much about boundaries either. Do we wanna sort of shift into that and sort of define what those look like and how important they are to relationships?
Sure, we could do that.
Okay, we have a little bit more time if you want, unless you
Yeah.
wanted to say something else about resentment.
No, I
'Cause it
mean,
seems like that's that's sort of the cause of when boundaries are broken is sort of the leading factor for resentment to be present,
yeah.
right?
I think that's true. Um, yeah, I mean, boundaries. You can create your own personal boundaries. You can create a boundary for the relationship, but I usually term that an agreement.
Okay.
Um, but if you are creating a boundary, you have to state it, whatever that is, and then stick to it, because oftentimes the goalpost will be moved, and then that's not a boundary. And
Mm,
a lot of times people will. I hear this a lot, especially when it comes to like when there's deal breakers in a relationship.
mhm,
People will often say, well, I don't want to give them an ultimatum.
mm,
And while I understand that, um, an ultimatum is trying to get somebody else's behavior to change by kind of a manipulative act. A boundary is simply what I allow and what I don't allow. And if you have to change your mindset they might sound similar, but the intent is different. One is, keeping me safe and secure, and the other is trying to get somebody else to change.
yeah. I think too, when I first started learning about boundaries, I made the assumption that just on the surface that I thought boundaries were more of just like, don't I don't know, like, we spend too much time together and we need to not spend so much time together. Like a literal boundary, like, I don't know, from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, I need to be, meditating or something and don't talk to me. Like, that's in my head is like what a boundary was. I mean, that could be a boundary, but I wasn't thinking of things like, that these are the things that if this were to happen, I would be very uncomfortable or I wouldn't feel safe. And so I'm just letting you know that this is a boundary for me, and it's up to you whether you'd like to respect that or not, or, do it or whatnot. So, are you coming back? Okay. All right, I'll talk to you later. Sorry, my son's leaving the gym.
All right.
Um, and so I don't know if everyone thinks that or knows that, but that was kind of new to me that I learned about
Yeah,
boundaries.
I mean, it's a way to define oneself, and to communicate something to another
Yeah.
that
And you're right. It does sound to me like it does sound like an ultimatum, kind of. It's like, you know, I don't know, I can't be with someone that wears red lipstick. Like, and I'm being just
yeah.
and so to me, if I want to be with my partner, I can't wear red lipstick. Like to me, that's an ultimatum. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
In my small brain.
right. I mean, it's not, but the ultimatum is if you wear red lipstick, I'm leaving you. Versus, listen, I have a real issue with, I just don't like red lipstick. I don't want red lipstick. This is silly, but, but, if you have somebody that can't stand red lipstick and is deal breaker,
Might
that's,
be a red flag.
yeah, red flag, red lips, whatever. Um, but, then you have a choice. Do you value the relationship more than you value your red lipstick, or do you value your red lipstick more than you value the relationship? It's
Yeah,
totally, and the other person could be like, listen, it's totally up to you. I get it if you like the red lipstick, like,
right.
and you don't want to give that up. It's
Mhm.
okay. But my boundary is that I don't date anyone who wears red lipstick.
Yeah. And
Um,
is there any opportunity for negotiation there too? Like, let's say you dig into the reason why you don't like it. Well, I don't like the color red because it hurts my eyes or something. And if you were to say like, well, I've got this one shade of red that you could call it red, but it doesn't hurt your eyes. And like, would that be okay? And again, it's oversimplifying, but like, is that even a thing? Can you negotiate boundaries?
Sure. I mean, it just depends how strong that boundary is, right?
Mhm.
If it's malleable, or I mean, the person might say, "Listen, I don't care what shade of red it is.
Right.
That's my bottom line."
Mhm.
And you might not like it, but at least it's clear. You
Right.
know, that's when it gets a little, I mean, we're talking personal boundaries versus relational boundaries, between the two people. Relational boundaries or agreements can definitely be renegotiated and
Mhm.
negotiated. Um, but
What are
it's when
what are
they're, when one person feels very strongly about something.
yeah, what are some examples of relational boundaries that you've experienced with your clients?
I mean, the agreements, like, we are monogamous, or we we tell one another everything, or I mean, it could be we make sure that we do the dishes before one another wakes up. I mean, it could be the simplest of things or the deepest of things, but a lot of times it's just amazing to me when people, um, some individuals just really have a hard time with adhering to agreements.
Mhm.
They just don't realize how that erodes safety and trust. And it's really detrimental.
Yeah, and it feels kinda like a respect thing too, like, if you respect the relationship, you know, you're willing to bend to whatever, you know, makes your partner feel safe, like, you wanna make your partner safe, bottom line.
Yes, I just don't think that people who break agreements they equate breaking agreements with making somebody feel unsafe
Yeah. No,
or
that's
not
probably true.
creating trust. Like, they
Mhm.
just are, like, they typically are just just kind of thinking of themselves,
Right,
and
so I was gonna say self-centered and just self-serving in terms of
yeah,
their
they default to a one person system, and they are like, I want to do, and I don't want to do that. Or it's not even that conscious, right? They're just
Mhm.
like, oh, I forgot, or
Right.
whatever it
Or
is.
I don't understand it, doesn't make sense to me.
I said yes when I
Not a
meant
big
no.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Mm.
islands want to please, and so oftentimes they will say yes when they mean no.
Mm.
And then they become passive aggressive by not adhering to the agreement because were pissed that they had to agree to it in the first
Say
place.
yes in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. So it's being an authentic in your authentic self and being able to say, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, let's see. Jody Lynn says, what are your top 3 most important things to agree on and consider non-negotiable? I think I need more information there.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, Jody Lynn. Jody Lynn, you could always call in. We could talk about this.
Yeah.
I
Phone
think
number is right there.
common works.
She's like, I've been trying,
It's
and
never a sure thing, but sometimes it does. Other than what are the 3 most important things to agree on and consider non-negotiable? Other than I think like the top 3 most important. It depends on the couple, right? I mean, you guys get to define what your important boundaries are, or rules for this relationship where we have to be monogamous. You can't eat meat on Fridays, and you can't
keep in a kosher house.
right.
Yeah. I mean, it really does depend on each couple. There's not like I, as a therapist or an outsider, don't get to define what your relationship is. That's for you guys to define. And I personally and personally might be like, ooh, I don't like those rules.
Sure.
Or boundaries or your agreements, but who cares?
Right.
I'm not in the relationship.
Yeah. If they work for those 2 people, then
Exactly. I don't care.
Yeah.
Go for it.
And I feel like too, all of this again goes back to clear and open communication, right? If you're expressing boundaries requires good communication.
Mhm.
If a boundary is broken or something's happening where you're feeling resentment, you need to communicate it.
Mhm.
And in order to sort of work through it, you have to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, some people are raised in families where they don't talk about things,
Mhm.
or they are very conflict avoidant, or it was so.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey, Kat.
Is this Jody Lynn?
It is.
Hi, how are you? Can you guys hear Jody Lynn?
I can.
I'm good.
Sweet.
I'm
Okay.
good.
Thanks for calling.
So what I was getting at is you see a lot of people in your sessions. Do you ever say like, oh my God, they never talked about this? Like, why didn't they talk about this and make sure they agreed on it? That's what I'm saying. Like top 3 things that you might see come up in your therapy sessions that we should be thinking about.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Like the dishes are like, that's like, that's easy stuff. I'm talking about like, if you see 15 people and all of them are like, didn't talk about one thing, is there anything that you see repeating?
Yeah, there's quite a few. One would be monogamy or open relationship. Another would be
Other than
full transparency. Do we agree upon that? Do we agree that we protect one another in public and private? Do we agree that we are the go-to people for one another? Like nobody knows more than each one of us. Are we the first people that we go to?
oh yeah, that protection.
Yeah.
Protecting each other in public and whatnot.
Yes. Are we available to one another 24/7? I mean, of course, that's you can't take that quite literally, but if we need to get a hold of one another, can we? And is that acceptable?
Yeah,
That's what I meant.
Do we prioritize the relationship?
Yeah. In your experience, you must see things come up over and over like, hello, you should have talked about that.
Yeah, a lot of times it's making these kind of more over or covert things that people don't talk about and just assume overt, and then having them discuss it with one another and come up with how do they want to run this thing, because oftentimes when they don't talk about it, each one has their own default of how they have thought about it, and they're not on the same page, and
Yeah.
they just never thought about it. They just never thought about talking about it.
And I think that's too, we talked a lot about like not just premarital counseling, but just before there's a problem counseling,
Yeah.
to really sort of pave the way for your future when you're with your person that you want to be with for a very long time. I feel like that's invaluable, whether there's even when there's not problems, to help somebody sort of navigate that road and build that foundation
Yeah.
to go forward, where all of these things would naturally probably come up in couples counseling.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, I really appreciate the show. It's great.
So glad you
And it
called
does
in.
get me thinking. Yeah. And I'll continue to listen. So you guys have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jody.
you too.
Bye.
Okay.
That was exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and it is very common, very common that I will have couples in session, and it is obvious that they're not doing certain things that, I think we talked about a secure functioning relationship as what PACT, guides people towards. And it's obvious they're not, this relationship is not adhering to some of these principles. And so my job is to highlight those things and have the couple talk about it and get it on board.
Yeah.
So
it seems really important.
It's common.
I would imagine like raising children too is probably a thing that you should talk about. I know for me, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. That was really, really important to me. And I don't know that I did a good job of setting that as a thing. I mean, I mentioned it many times, but I don't think, my spouse and I at the time really sat down and like talked about it or planned for it, or maybe I didn't express how important it was for me. And I ended up not being able to be a stay-at-home mom. And I think that was a big factor in how I treated my husband at the time, because I felt like I wasn't heard and I felt like I wasn't maybe respected because I had to go to work. And, totally probably my fault for, not talking about it in a very specific way, but big, big, big resentment type thing.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. It's like oftentimes, a lot of times it can happen where we do talk about these things. We talk about them.
Thought it was covered,
Yes, we thought it was covered, and it just keeps going, right? And we get tired of talking about it. But instead of, that's why it's so, it's blatant, but it's not super big, right? And it's repetitive, and it just eats away, because I think we get to the point where we're just like, I'm just so fucking tired of talking about this. Like, why bring it up? It's just never going to go anywhere. Yeah. And, the resentment builds. But again, coming back to the boundaries, is we haven't then put down the boundary of, if you don't do this anymore, if you continue to do this, we're done, or whatever,
Deal breaker.
Yeah. Because I think it just gets to the point where, we fear loss. We don't want to lose that thing, the relationship. And I think there's some rationalizations in our minds of like, well, is this really a deal breaker? Is this really, if they don't do the dishes one more time, I'm gonna like divorce them because
right. Or even is my request like valid and rational? Like, is that realistic of me to say, like, I want to be a stay-at-home mom? Like, that's hard to do these days. And again, that's just an example. But yeah, then you start to sort of second guess like your desires, right?
Yeah.
You think, oh gosh, maybe I'm being really unreasonable, and I'm not going to end it because of that.
Right. But at the same time, the resentment is,
Oh, it's still there.
going to
It
the
doesn't go
bank.
away.
Yeah, and it's growing. And so I just feel like it's very insipid, and it's
Yeah.
it's tough. Tough.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff.
Yeah.
I like that. Uh-oh. We got a big comment here. The biggest issue I had with my ex was communication, mostly in the fact that she could never be wrong. Well, I mean, I get that. She'd argue until you broke. It's the same this day with our kids. It's crushing to see.
Yeah.
I wonder what her attachment style is.
Yeah.
Couldn't guess.
I don't know just by that. I might imagine.
Give us some insight on that.
Yeah. But with couples like this, then, I say, are you more invested in being right or more invested in the relationship?
Yeah.
Because if one person has to be right, the other one has to be wrong. That means you're inherently, two one-person systems. You're not on the same team. Nobody likes to lose. So resentment will then build, it goes back into that. So it's more like, hey, we care about this relationship. We disagree. How can we find what we agree on around this topic rather than go to battle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, in my own relationship too, I found myself just being very critical of my partner, not necessarily having to always be right, but and he would even say that, like, every time he opened his mouth, I would have something to say about it that it wasn't right or was wrong or correcting or something like that. And like, that doesn't make me feel good that I was acting that way. But it didn't feel bad at the time. Like, I didn't even recognize, that I was doing that. And I don't, there's probably other issues as to why I was doing that, but
Yeah.
it's just another symptom of, something going awry. And instead of just complaining about it or saying, hey, why do you always do that? Or, blowing up at each other because of it, is like going to get help about it and to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Things get played out around other things.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So, are we back next week? Do we think?
I think so.
We should be.
Yeah.
And keep those comments coming on YouTube. Thanks everyone for joining the chat. Thank you, Jody, for calling in. We will have more topics for you. If you guys want to hear something specific, please let us know. We love to get different scenarios and real life examples of what's going on to kind of solidify the points that Julie's talking about, which help me to sort of sift through all of this. So we appreciate all of your support, and have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye.